So hello everybody. I have the honor and distinction of being able to present someone I called a friend and a mentor, Mr. Jenkins from OpenText. I've had the pleasure of introducing Tom a few dozen times already. You'd think I know his bio off by heart by now, but I can't. It's impossible because every time he's got more letters after his names that keep adding every time I do it, and then there's like 2 other roles or functions that get added every time I have to present him. He's probably going to joke and say that the older you get, the longer your bio gets. So by default, that makes him 177. So let me start off by introducing you to Tom. So Mr. Jenkins is the chair of the board of OpenText Corporation of Waterloo, which is the largest software company in Canada. He's also the chair of the National Research Council here in Ottawa and the 10th chancellor of the University of Waterloo. Tom's been active for more than 30 years in innovation and economic development in both the private and public sectors. He's also a member of the board of directors of Manulife Financial, Thomson Reuters, and TransAlta. He's the director of the Canadian Council of Chief Executives and the chair of the advisory board of the School of Public Policy at the University of Calgary. He's also a member of the advisory board at the Royal Canadian Air Force and the founder of Communitech in Waterloo. So Mr. Jenkins received his MBA from York University, his Master's in Science from the University of Toronto, his undergrad in engineering, physics and commerce from McMaster. He's also a fellow at the Canadian Academy of Engineering. He was awarded the Canadian Forces Decoration and the Queen's Diamond Jubilee Medal. And lastly, he's also an officer of the Order of Canada for his contributions to education and innovation in Canada. So without further ado, I'd like to turn the floor over to Mr. Jenkins.
Thanks for that, Alex. Alex and I have known each other a long time, and at one time he had to suffer working for me. But it's great to see Alex here, and it's great to see so many familiar faces. This is a topic area that for some of you, it's a brand new topic. For many of you in the audience, we've been talking about this for quite some time. And the slides I'm going to use today, I'm going to assume no knowledge because it's really important for a lot of us in the room. And as Deputy Premier Matthews had said this morning, she's new to this topic. Many of you are actually new to the topic, and it's wonderful that you're here to talk about this and to figure out how we make this work for Canada more effectively. You've heard in the discussions this morning some great strides forward. For many of us, if we could have imagined that we would have folks like Facebook and Intuit so engaged, that we would have the CRA so digitized. It's a great credit to a lot of the things that we've already done, but I'm going to take you back a bit and give you some first principles. And I'm also going to broaden the discussion to not just Ontario and the federal government, but the rest of the country. And I'm also going to take a different tact because some of the slides I'm just going to whip through because I really wanted to give you an archive to take away when you go back to your departments, your agencies, your provinces, your municipalities, etc., that this becomes a library that you can use when you go off and evangelize this. So for those of you that know a lot of this story, I apologize in advance, but it's so important that the newbies that are here that you get an idea of the background and why some of this is true and some of the things that you can relate back. So with that, let me start with the sink or swim. There's a bit of a, we have to be aware that in Canada, we are only 2% of the world GDP, and we're 1/2 of 1% of the world population. So we're already starting, now mind you, we're one of the most digitized and most connected populations in the world, but we have to keep in mind that there are many, many others in this race. And so there's a real challenge for us as we go forward, enabling our own digital world. So here's some of the key thoughts that I'd like to deal with today. Digital disruption is removing barriers. And we can say on one hand that that's great because we've got open government, we've got citizen engagement, but it's also a great challenge for us as a Canadian society because as all of you know, we have things like the CRTC and other measures that have been built over the years to retain our culture, to retain our identity, It's important to us as a society when, again, we're only half of 1% of the world population. So that can cause some disruptions in our society. And I think we'll see that going forward. And you know what? That's the way it goes. But we also have to be aware of it as Canadians and have this conversation. And what do we do about it? The flattening of the world and in the enabling of global trade agreements. You'd say, well, this is about open government. But as you'll see as I talk, open government is a critical piece for us for outreach to other societies. Innovation, as Minister Bryson had mentioned this morning, many of you know I've spent a lot of time thinking about innovation and our innovation strategy for the country. This is absolutely a bedrock enabling technology to help us be more innovative in Canada. Now, I'll try and develop those ideas a bit. Content is the core of collaboration. If we want to have dialogue, you can't, think of it this way. You really, really can't have Facebook, you can't have Twitter, et cetera, unless you have an archive that comes from, whether it's Google or Bing or et cetera. It all started with an archive. And content is everything. It's the digital water for the digital water cooler, if you will. Intentional actions are required. This does not just happen. We see this in other countries. What you're doing here today, what Wayne Waters and Deb Matthews did by calling us all together, that's an intentional action. It's wonderful that they took the leadership to do that. But let me start with a joke, because it's very appropriate for us in Canada. A crow was sitting on a tree doing nothing all day. A small rabbit saw the crow and asked him, "Can I also sit like you and do nothing all day long?" The crow answered, "Sure, why not?" So the rabbit sat on the ground below the crow. All of a sudden, a fox appeared, jumped on the rabbit, and ate it. And of course, the moral of this story is to be sitting and doing nothing, you must be sitting very, very high up. And this is our dilemma in Canada. Canada has had a wonderful run, decades and decades. As Canadians, we like to complain to each other, et cetera. But the reality is we've had a great run, like 50, 60 years of tremendous prosperity. But it's also the great challenge for us because we just can't sit and do nothing. I'm not saying that we are doing nothing in our country, but maybe we're not going as fast as some of the other societies. So some of the background stuff. That's me a long time ago with Jerry Yang launching Yahoo. And so right away you see, and this was technology that was developed at the University of Waterloo, and it became the archive of the web because we decided not to work in the consumer area, but rather work behind the firewall with governments and with corporations from all over the world that you can see there, from the White House to 10 Downing Street to our own government here. That is the origins of it. So we're speaking now about open government right at the very beginning. And do you know, next door in Rideau Center in the tower is the core to all the records management and archive of many of the governments of the world. So it's somewhat ironic, we're talking about archives and open government and what have you here, and yet the German archive is managed from next door. The American, the Japanese, et cetera. So we have a wealth of knowledge internationally right here in Ottawa. And that's the heritage that we have to bring to this. So we started right at the very beginning. And one of the things to understand, and I'm going to try and develop this idea for everyone, open government is just one aspect of something called the deep web. We have talked this morning about, gee, if only we had this data from AgCan or this data from NRCan, et cetera. Well, that's true in the world. So what we're reflecting in our conversations about Canada is in fact what's going on in the world. And many people believe that when you go on Google or Yahoo or Bing or whatever, that you've really seen the whole web. Well, that's not true. It's only 4% of the web. In fact, the vast part of that iceberg, the deep web, is behind firewalls all over the world. And you get to see what a zettabyte looks like. It's a lot of information, and it's geometrically progressing. It's unbelievable how big the internet continues to get. But here's the topic for us through these next 2 days and hopefully ongoing. This line is moving. That 4% that's changing. Societies all over the world are demanding that that line be brought down. Now, as was also discussed this morning, whether it's about metadata, et cetera, that is a discussion that we have to have as a debate in societies all throughout the world. Different societies have different views of this, of course, but nonetheless, this line is moving. And so we can decide to be a follower or a leader. And, you know, there's so many people here, I'm hopeful that we can be a leader in this regard. Now, again, as part of sort of capacity building for many of you, you can go online to Amazon, et cetera. I've written all kinds of books about this with Mark Barrenechea, who's the CEO of OpenText, on the deep web itself and also about eGov. And you'll see examples from all over the world. But the real root of where Minister Bryson was getting at, I wanted to show you in a chart. This chart is the challenge facing our generation and the next generation, because the previous generation, you know, we've been a little bit fat, dumb, and happy in Canada. And our productivity numbers plummeted over the last 30 years. And, you know, all of us here will say, well, how do I grasp that? You know, like I see this chart, and American, because that's our biggest trading partner, is the baseline. And then if you look at how we have been doing per unit of labor compared to the Americans for the last 30 years, it's just gone down. Now, this is something I was part of many years ago called the Wilson Report, where we started to look at, well, how are we doing against America, the OECD countries, et cetera? And it was a dramatically dark realization on all of us that we had an issue with innovation and productivity. And by the way, productivity is not about working longer hours for less money. That's almost what everybody thinks. The reality is, and OECD writes on this all the time, productivity is working smarter. It's actually working shorter and getting more done. And that is what the digital era is about. And a lot of the examples you heard this morning were productivity examples. And instead of spending 3 months going to find out about the budget for bed bugs, right? It should be just immediately available. That's a productivity hit. Do you know, in corporate, they've been working on this for 20 years because most of the, you know, productivity gurus, et cetera, in America identified right away that over 30% of a worker's time is engaged in searching for things. So that's why in corporate they spent so much time building up databases and archives and what have you, because when you call up as a customer to an insurance company or a car agency, et cetera, you want your answer right away. But that takes an investment. The impact on our standard of living, and I'll relate back to you, I should say before I leave this slide, Len Waverman, who's one of our great economists in Canada, did a study of this chart and determined that our gap, which is flatlined around 30% below the Americans, do you know that 3/4 of it is due to digital? So we don't have to guess why. It's our lack of adoption of things like the topic of today has caused us to be at a competitive disadvantage. Our children will be impacted by this because Roger Martin did a study at the U of T about what is that impact of not being digital. Well, he estimates that more than $12,000 a year comes out of the pocket of every Canadian. That's just to put it in perspective. The other day, Conference Board came out with a quote that the commodities trough that we're in the middle of costs every Canadian $1,800 a year. Look at that one. That's $12,800. It's 10 times the amount every year for the last 30 years. People can pay off their mortgages. So it's a huge issue. So when we talk about open government and we talk about citizen engagement, as we should, because that's our primary raison d'etre of open dialogue, getting the open information, remember that underneath all of that is an enabling digital technology that drives productivity. Because you'd say, well, no, we were talking about citizen engagement. But who uses StatsCan? Businesses. Small businesses all throughout Canada use StatsCan to run their businesses better. So you can imagine if we publish all of our digital information, our society, all of our businesses will become much more productive. So when you go back to your different departments, agencies, your industrial partners, not just your citizens, but your industrial partners, are greatly benefited by this because only you can open up your content in your department. Digital revolution is going to challenge us further. Unfortunately, folks, that 30%, although we flatlined, it's about to get dramatically worse if we don't catch up. Because the web, digital, you know, it's the world I live in, it's accelerating. It's not like a linear, it's a geometric. There are some tremendous, tremendous things happening. In Davos this year, the #1 discussion was about white-collar automation. And were you going to be driving the bus, or were you going to be run over by the bus? And so this is coming, and our ability to digitally compete starts with things like open government. And the pace of change. I'm going to finish the talk. I'm sorry if I'm giving you so many, you know, sort of provoking things that you go, ooh. But that's what I'm trying to do, is to give you other things to think about while you're doing the open government. But one huge thing, you know, Michael Dell in Davos was asked, why are you doing this 60-some-odd billion-dollar merger and what have you? And the first thing he pointed to is there's going to be 8 trillion devices. I'll come back to this at the end, because right now this is still very much an open government human conversation. I'll put to you, by the end of my presentation, it will be a machine conversation. And the rules we set now will be the rules that the machines follow. And you may think, oh, well, this sounds like science fiction. I'll come back to it. Climbing this curve is insanely hard. There are so many things you've got to get right. And make no mistake, folks, all the open government initiative of all those other countries, if they go faster than us, they will be more competitive than us. And their societies not only benefit from the citizen engagement, but they benefit from greater productivity. It matters that we keep up. Some examples, we heard some tremendous examples this morning. And I won't go through them. I just put them here. It's always good to have external references. But here are some of the most popular consumer apps that all of you use that could not have happened unless the Obama administration had opened up the data. Google Maps. That's an app that was built on government data. So Canada has a strong history in this, though. For example, in 2010, Alex led the effort on the G20. When we held the G20 in Toronto, Canada was the first host country to digitize the entire interaction of the 20 leaders. And in fact, Canada in Gatineau has been asked several times over the years to, in fact, recreate that digital environment for the G20s. Open government effort that you've heard about today from Treasury Board, Ontario government, but there are many other provinces and municipalities that have also created this effort, and a lot of them are represented here, and I'll come back to that in a second. But we've got more than 20 years. ATIP, such as it is, as the minister said, needs to be updated and what have you, but we've had it. We've had a mechanism, as painful as it's been, but we've had the mechanism. But we need to go faster. Just to give you an idea of the role of open government, why it's so important in our country, as we heard earlier from Facebook, there are roughly around 20 million or so users in Canada. Within the public sectors of our 3 levels, there's more than 1 million users. So you can see right away, if public sector doesn't lead this for Canada, it's not going to happen. It is the single biggest entity in our society. So what you do over the next 2 days, really matters. Because if you can set the tone and set the baseline for what we expect our organizations to do, then you'll have done a great service to the country, because it'll set the bar on all the other corporations and all the other NGOs and entities that are out there. And I won't go through all the government organization, but in the books you can read about whether it's Peel Regional or the City of Calgary, et cetera. But here's another classic sort of Canadian thing. The boy rode on the donkey and the old man walked. As they went along, they passed some people who remarked, it was shame. The old man was walking and the boy was riding. The man and the boy thought maybe the critics were right, so they changed positions. Later, they passed some people that remarked, what a shame he makes that little boy walk. They decided that they both would walk. Sounds Canadian, right? Soon they passed some more people who thought they were stupid to walk when they had a decent donkey to ride, so they both rode the donkey. Now they passed some more people that shamed them by saying, how awful to put such a load on a poor donkey. The boy and the man said they were probably right, so they decided to carry the donkey. This is now very Canadian. As they crossed the bridge, they lost their grip on the animal. He fell into the river and drowned. And of course, the lesson here is if you try to please everyone, you will eventually lose your ass. Please let us not leave the next 2 days here going off in so many different directions. I was sitting with the OECD in Paris a few years ago, and the chief economist leaned back in his chair and he went, Canada, great place to visit, small country that you Canadians managed to make even smaller. And what he was trying to say is that we're just a little country. There's only 35 million of us. Most of Canada, in terms of this topic, is represented in this room. Shame on us if we leave here and we go off and do our own open data initiative, our own open information, our own open dialogues, because we can. That would be a shame if we did that. If you look at this previous slide, we have deployments all across the country that are pretty much the same core technology underneath. There's no technical reason why we can't act together as a country, because we can get in one room. When you're, take your pick, but even in America or India, if you try and put everybody in one room, it's not possible. It's not possible. We actually have the advantage that we could actually act as a cohesive society, but we better be careful not to act like the donkey. So really quickly, and again, these are just slides to encourage people to go back and look at the Open Government Partnership, the 2 decades of investment. We've heard today, there was a lot of thinking that we went through to get to this. It's very logical. You cannot jump, but here's something that wasn't said this morning. You cannot jump to open dialogue until you have figured out open data and until you have shaped the data so that you have open information. Very important to realize you can't just get to Facebook. You've got to get ready to get to Facebook. Very important to remember that. And again, why we're here, and I'll just leave those as examples of things, both from the federal and the Ontario initiatives. Policies and standards, I won't bore everyone with this, but something that's very, very important that we've all got to be careful about in this room, because we have a public duty, and I'll get to this part. Data sovereignty is sort of an easy placeholder, let's say, for privacy. So on the one hand, we're sitting here talking about open government, making everything available. And we're going to talk about open by default examples in a second. But we have to be careful, because within society, if we blow it, if we think we've anonymized data and somebody with a decent heuristic algorithm comes along and sort of convolves data sets, we have to be very careful about that. So at Treasury Board, all through these last 3 years, on the committee, the oversight committee, we were very careful to keep asking, okay, if I'm a really clever computer scientist, can I recreate the data and figure out who that person is from Sudbury. This is a big issue all of us have to be aware of, because it's not a popular thing for you to say, because everybody is sitting here going, well, let's be open by default, let's have all the open data so that we can get to the open dialogue, and we all want to do it. But realize in our society there is a level of trust in all of you. So you have to ask those questions. Those are questions that, you know, maybe people don't want you to ask those questions because you're slowing down the process. But as we all know, if you get it wrong, you can set back that which you're trying to do by a decade. And so you have to think about some of these things and be very careful about it. You can't just flip a switch and throw everything wide open. But as the minister said this morning, there are categories, and I'm going to show one as an example, where you can be open by default. It's just that you do have to be careful. Think of Intuit and the CRA. You got to be careful about that. So some of the examples that I referred to that are coming up in the breakouts that I'd like to highlight. One is Heritage Canada, and I'll show a slide. And Alex, are you going to be doing that? Oh, okay, good. So Alex Benet, who you've already met as president of the Science and Technology Museum, is going to give you an example of open by default. And it's actually a live, like right now example that actually he's just finishing now. And are you going to talk about the Governor General's project? Or yeah, okay. So you'll get a really good live thing that the Governor General is sponsoring as part of his Innovation Awards program. And so that's absolute cutting edge, the latest that we can do within the Government of Canada. And I encourage you to go to Alex. Alex, when's your breakout? 9:15? Also, if you're at the bar tonight, you better not be there too long. But 9:15 here for Alex. So I encourage you to go see that, because, Alex, if I can, on your behalf, make this commitment, this is technology. This is technology that's available to you. Alex has made an agreement to make this available. So go and listen to what Alex has to say tomorrow, because there are already departments and agencies within the GOC that have already taken Alex up on this very generous offer. The second thing that I hope you see is the Open Data Exchange. Now, the ODX, Kevin Tour, where's Kevin? Kevin, stand up. Stand up, Kevin. So Kevin Tour is from Waterloo and from Communitech. And was it 2 years ago, Kevin, or 3? 2 years, I think, right? Yeah, 2 years ago, Treasury Board, University of Waterloo, Desire to Learn, OpenText, did I get everybody? Communitech, came together as a partnership to provide an area where all of you could go to get apps built for you by startups. And so Kevin's in charge of that. And Kevin, when's your breakout? Well, there you go. You've got two competing breakouts with each other. So depending on whether you want to get the technology for free or you want to develop your own app, you have two breakouts to go to tomorrow. But I do hope that you take advantage of both groups and learn a little bit more about what they're doing. And so, for example, Smart Open Data at Heritage Canada is what Alex will talk about, and Kevin will be talking about the ODX. And it's so important because this is where productivity comes from. When you think of Google Maps and what have you, you think of, you know, bulge bracket American software companies. But our startups can take the data that's in your departments and shape it into information and create dialogue. And then, guess what they get to do? They can take all that learning and go to another country and say, or go to another province or go to another municipality and say, hey, I did this, would you like to have it? So we can be engaged in helping our small startups get going. And so I hope you take advantage of that, because that's what we did. Now, I promised you before I'd stop that I'd talk about the machines. Now, the rise of the machines, you know, it's very Terminator, you know, Terminator 2 or whatever, you know, everyone always thinks about that. But consider the following. The trillion devices that Michael Dell talked about in Davos. We have billions of people today generating petabytes hourly. We are about to move into the world where we have hundreds of billions of devices generating zettabytes in seconds. So the scale change of this, in other words, what I'm trying to tell you is this conference and maybe a few more conferences, the humans get to have the discussion. But soon, whatever the rules are, whatever the formats, the business processes, et cetera, that we create, that's what gets coded into the machines. And trust me, when the machines start going, we can't speak at that level. And you say, well, science fiction. Well, let me give you an example. This already happened. Flash crash. And this is 6 years ago now. 6 years ago this spring. The flash crash happened, and if you want to read the book and what have you, but on May 6, 2010, we had nanosecond trading machines that decided that the whole market was going to zero. And 1 nanosecond trading machine can do the trader of a human. So now think of open government for humans and then open government with machines. 1 nanosecond trader in 1 second can do the trading of a human in 67 years. So you can imagine how quickly you can cycle down that curve very quickly if the machines convince themselves. And you know what our response was in the financial services community? This is a true story. We shut the machines off. And in fact, they call it circuit breakers, right? But the reality is, you know what our response is right now? We shut the machines off. So we have to think about this. So yes, we've got to get the humans on, and yes, we've got to get citizen engagement and what have you, but we're going to be moving to machines. And so we've really got to think our way through this, because our internal networks have to have extreme connectivity going forward. Think of that nanosecond trading machine doing a human trading of 67 years in 1 second, and you'll get an idea of the challenges. We've got to create digital information processes. So what we're doing now at human scale is what we'll do later at machine. And you could say, well, we just won't do it. Well, then we are at an enormous competitive disadvantage to the rest of the countries. Do you know in New York City, where the cable comes across from the Atlantic, all those companies that do nanosecond trading, guess where they built all their trading servers and floors and what have you? Right where the cable comes up into Manhattan, because it matters. Just those microseconds, it matters. And we're in a world of increasing information governance. So I apologize if I'm giving you all these headaches to think about, but I felt a responsibility to at least get these slides in front of you so that you've got a holistic idea of what we're doing when we talk about this. And I'll leave you with one last slide. Everyone talks about how China is rising up. China is simply returning. It's returning. People have to realize that China missed the last great innovation era. It missed the Industrial Revolution. And so the Chinese, if you were in the Roman Empire, the Chinese were, between 40 and 45% of world GDP. They're simply returning to that now. And so our challenge, we're in the middle of an information revolution, and open government is a core part of it. We can't miss this. And to the extent that we're laggards, we will be impacted. So we have to, this is a great conference, and Godspeed to all of you, but keep this in mind that the innovation and productivity that comes out of what you do, I would put to you, is just as important or maybe more important than the citizen engagement, even though the citizen engagement we all want. So the takeaway, this is such a strategic enabler for Canada. So when you do go back into your departments, agencies, municipalities, et cetera, remember, this isn't just about citizen engagement, which in and of itself is a reason to do this. It's about our country and making sure we keep up with all the other countries. It's such a core thing. So if you have an audience that is sort of sitting there going, oh, I don't know if I want the bother of this or the budget, you have to also hit them with the fact that this is part of your department, your agency, your province's contribution to our society keeping up. Thanks for the attention.
So wherever you want. So that leaves us roughly 15, 20 minutes for questions, Tom. So maybe I'll tee it off because you've thrown a lot of stuff at the audience, talking about productivity, innovation, a big part of the room being public service. What would be the one thing for public servants, federal, provincial, municipal, that you would say is the core thing that has to happen next to get to sort of the promised land?
I think Minister Bryson said something really, really important this morning. For all of you in the public service, he spoke to the human element of taking chances. I hope that you in the public service will demand, ask, request, suggest that you have permission to take chances. Because, you know, in private sector, we make mistakes all the time. We stand on the shoulders of those that came before us, and those that came before us made mistakes. Every IT implementation does not go from concept to actual rollout to the user perfectly. There are all kinds of issues that happen. That's normal. Shared services, for example. Believe it or not, if you are in, I don't know, take your pick. I shouldn't say any of the company names, but pick a big company in the world today, they went through the same thing. So it's important that you seek and gain permission the way Minister Bryson was talking about, because I think what we need to do, the examples that we're talking about this morning, the examples you're going to talk about in breakouts the next 2 days, that's all great, but if you don't feel safe to actually take the chance to do it, the risk aversion will unfortunately slow you down. So I would say that's the most important thing, that there be a real vibrant, robust discussion within the public service about taking chances. I thought when the comment was made about, you know, I want to go have dinner with the person that failed, you know, that's great, because that sends a message. And I have to tell you by extension, if you ever wonder about Waterloo, I remember moving to Waterloo to start my first company, and I watched several of my friends fail badly, right? Lost a lot of money, very embarrassing, all this sort of thing. And you know, something magical happened in Waterloo. Do you know people would come up to them, and instead of ignoring them or not want to talk about it, they say, "What's your next idea?" And that's the secret of Waterloo. Waterloo, there's not a fear of failure. It's a celebration of your experience, and what are you going to do next? Mike Lazaridis, Jim Balsley, you know, some of our most famous entrepreneurs, I've known all my life, and I can assure you that Mike and Jimmy, they made a lot of mistakes, you know, like along the way, and had lots of product ideas, but they kept trying. And eventually, they built RIM and BlackBerry. But I think that's probably the most important thing you need to achieve in the public service is you need permission.
Great, thank you. So you spoke about machines taking over, and this one's talking to me right here, telling me I was wrong. We don't have 15 minutes, we have 10 minutes. So probably turn it over to the floor for questions if there are any at this point.
What advice would you give for government departments that still have a fee based associated to getting information?
Oh, what a great question. The first thing that I would strongly suggest you do is look at the private sector examples. And you don't have to go any further than, say, newspapers. Newspapers had a fee for service, a fee for the information. You know, I would publish a newspaper. And they have learned about the economics of what's called the long tail. And you really need, you don't have to reinvent this, but you do have to get educated. And within your department, which has built a fee-for-service economics, you have to have a shared agreement about how you're going to wean yourself off that and then re-justify the value. And that can take a lot of different, there are many peripheral ways to recoup the investment. And so you really have to look to the private sector. We have 20 years now of examples of those that did it well and those that probably wish they could have done it over again. So I would really encourage you, you don't have to guess at this. 20 years ago, we had to guess quite a bit. You don't have to guess now. You can look at the value that you're conveying. A huge thing going on right now is in online periodicals in the academia. they're going through a massive rethink about how referee journals operate. So what I'm trying to give you a sense of is there's lots of other examples to use, and that is an internal discussion in your department about how do you morph, but morph you must.
Great, thank you. We have time for a few more questions if anybody would like to come up to the mic.
Yeah, Ken Slumko with Fleischman Hillard. An interesting question, like you're encouraging public servants to take chances, to get the permission to take chances. And I'm wondering if there's a disconnect between politics and taking chances. In other words, someone takes a chance, screws up, it's the minister that takes the fall with the opposition and all the criticism of it. How do you get around that? That's my question.
Yeah, that's another great question, and I appreciate that you interjected that. I'm not suggesting to all of you just go take chances. I'm suggesting that you get permission to take chances, because every department is different in the Government of Canada, obviously, and the situation is different, and that has to be a dialogue with a minister and a minister's staff. But I would put to you, we have a new government in Ottawa, and they are a young group, and they're very smart. There's a lot of millennials, and I think you will find a very interesting engagement. But you in the public service, you have to really start that engagement. Because they can't read your mind. You may be sitting in meetings with chiefs of staff or the minister or whoever, and they think they've been very obvious about what their intent is, and you're sitting there going, there's no way I could do that under the current legislation that you've got to work within. Please have that, if I may, open dialogue with them to say to them, minister, or, chief of staff, whatever, I'd like to do that, but we're not really set up to do that. You have to have those discussions. It's as important as an architecture discussion or a rollout discussion, et cetera. And I really believe, both ministers this morning remarked on this, and I think it's true. I think that the population will view their politicians in a much better way if they can actually watch the process unfold. Because if anything we've learned in private sector, crowdsourcing is absolutely the most superior enabling way to do things. We don't have time to get into all the examples, but in every situation where you had a chance where an internal siloed group could do something or a crowdsourced group could do it, crowdsourcing wins every time.
Thank you. So we have time for two more. So over to our right over here, and then we'll go left.
Hi, Logan Scott from Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada. We try to keep it brief here. So now you struck me, you mentioned that we need to release data, but we need to be very cautious in how we release our data because there's still the capacity for mashing data sets together and predictive analytics, et cetera, causing much greater issues down the line. So now, crucial context, as an IM analyst who's responsible with dealing with business units and trying to expedite that process of releasing data, the security issues are paramount on the minds of the business units constantly. So something that we've noticed at our department is that the capacity for private sector and academia to run predictive analytics and data science in general is so much richer and vibrant and moving so much quicker than government is capable of. I'm wondering, how can we bridge that kind of gap in skills? And how can we prepare ourselves in a way to produce data that's meaningful but that doesn't have those tremendous security risks?
Thanks for the question. Actually, the method is quite simple, and we can take our lesson from cyber intrusions. We already deal with huge security issues. We've already had several cyber intrusions that have occurred both in the private sector as the public sector. And do you know what the response of industry has been? They retain hackers. And the hackers, before they release something, they give it to the hackers to hack them. And I would suggest to you that if you think you have sensitive data that could be convolved or mashed up, et cetera, I would bring in the very people that would end up doing it. And so I would find the equivalent to the hackers within the heuristics area and have them have at it. Kevin Tour can hook anybody up in this room with his group of startups, and you can, at a very low cost, very quickly have that assurance that you, I mean, it's not absolute, I mean, you know, but it's a methodology that at least gives you a fighting chance at it.
Great, we'll take our last question over here.
Hi, great. Ailish Campbell from Finance Canada. Thanks for that great presentation, Tom. I wanted to build on two things that I heard from your presentation. Point number one on statistics. Can you just talk to us about the importance of a foundational institution like Statistics Canada to this entire enterprise? You know, having a recapitalized, reinvigorated Statistics Canada that I think really feels the importance of its work, not just for government employees, but also for the business community. Can you just unpack that a little? Where have you seen some of your business clients using Statistics Canada? What are some of the important data sets there? And a special shout out to anyone in the audience from that important institution. Second question, crowdsourcing. Totally agree with you. I think it requires a huge culture change to understand those of us who are experts and like to hold our information and our expertise, you know, inside a safe space, inside government, to open that up and say, actually, we have to put citizens at the center of this, and there's way more brains out there than in here. Finance Canada reached 250,000 Canadians in its consultation process this year. We got impressions. We don't know how many, you know, individual Canadians that was, because we could have had the same Canadians reaching us multiple times. But can you give us an example from your international experience of a government that you think has really taken this out pretty far? Like, so I like to joke, it's hard to alpha beta test taxation.
Yeah.
Can't imagine the two groups that want to volunteer for that. But, you know, it can't just be about filling potholes, although that's really important stuff, and I think we have a lot to learn from cities. But speaking of some of what the federal responsibilities are, where are some of the governments internationally that you're seeing really push the envelope? Where do we have a lot to learn? Thanks.
Okay, thanks for that. I'll do my best to try and cover those. The first thing is StatsCan is an absolute jewel for us. It's just, I mean, we were leaders when we created it, and I'll tell you, in the private sector, analytics, Mark Berenshea, who's here, is the CEO of OpenText, has spent a huge amount of time on analytics. And you heard some of our speakers this morning talk about how analytics change the way the interactions go. And if you're not constantly analyzing and shaping, you're missing it. And what happens now, and with the rise of the machines, if we don't have a capacity in government to be able to develop those predictive analytics, we will fall behind. And StatsCan is our absolute jewel to do that. Now, having said that, though, it's not just about long-form census. If, oh my God, we think that the role of StatsCan is to just go off and get the long-form census, because if you go to your second comment about crowdsourcing, quite frankly, crowdsourcing done properly negates the need for a long-form census if we give StatsCan the authority, the responsibility, the budget to reimagine StatsCan. It would be a shame if all we did was simply go back to something we were doing back in the 70s. You know, sorry, the world changed. And so, but the role of StatsCan and what it does, we need to reimagine it. So I hope we use the long-form census and some of the hoopla to actually reimagine StatsCan in today's environment. Now, to come to your third question, in reimagining it, and again, I apologize I went so quick through some of the examples, but if you download the eGov book, it's got, I think Mark and we did 65 examples from all over the world of things that we thought were cutting edge, whether it was the Bundespost or the Americans in their effort with the Obama administration opening up the information, Google Maps as an example. They're going to kill me if I try to go into too many examples, but if you download that book, you'll have all kinds of examples there.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Ailish. So on behalf of everyone here, Tom, I'd like to thank you very much for your time, your presentation, and taking the time to answer some of our questions. And that puts an end to the the machine is saying it would never kill us. That's great. Thanks back there. Awesome.
I'm not kidding. You should see it.
It just
It's
threw me
funny.
off. Thank you. Awesome. Thanks, Tom.
That's funny.